My name is Mason. I'm 31. In the morning, my wife stood on our porch and told me I'd always been a failure. The coffee in my hand tasted like it had come from a rusty faucet. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She looked at the realtor's flyer in her other hand. High-gloss paper with staged photos of a kitchen I tiled on my knees after midnight. "You're holding me back," she added, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear like she was adjusting a crown. "I'm filing today." Then she laughed. Not a wild laugh. A small, confident breath. The kind you exhale when you've rehearsed the scene in your head a dozen times and already pictured the applause. I didn't say anything clever. I just stared at the flyer and thought about the grout lines. The tiny imperfections I knew were there, but nobody else could see. It struck me that marriage felt like those grout lines. You do the work bent over, careful and patient, but the first person to judge it is the one who won't even kneel long enough to look closely. If you ask my wife, ex-wife, technically, though the paperwork would drag, when our marriage started to fail, she'd say it was the day I decided I wanted to own boring things. Not flashy businesses, not an app or a startup. Boring. I liked storage units. I liked vending machines. I liked the stale smell of a small office at midnight while I figured out why the soda machine in the municipal building ate quarters. I liked contracts. The short ones I could renegotiate in a year and the long ones that quietly paid the same every month like a heartbeat. If you grow up without a safety net, you fall in love with steady rhythms. When we got married at 26, I was still working maintenance at a mid-rise apartment building. I fixed washers, cleared drains, drove an old Civic with the clear coat peeling like sunburn. I also had a second phone full of notes, client leads, city auction dates, old warehouses with broken gate motors, and a list of every used snack machine within 3 counties. She knew about the notebook and rolled her eyes. "My husband and his big business," she'd say at dinners with her family, swirling a glass of wine. Her mother would ask if my business came with benefits or just grime. "He's scrappy," my wife would say, patting my knee like I was a rescue pet. Everyone would laugh. I learned to smile. I learned to eat quickly. One Saturday, I woke to the sound of a drill and found her brother, Chase, putting holes into the wall for a floating shelf he bought for our living room. He needed to prove he could do something without me, he said, since some of us have real shoulder strength, not just spreadsheet strength. The shelf fell in slow motion an hour later when he put a stack of cookbooks on it. I cleaned the drywall dust with a wet cloth and a tight jaw while he and my wife watched a home renovation show and made comments about real contractors. I fixed the wall and installed the shelf properly when they went out for frozen yogurt, then listened to my wife brag to her mother that Chase had finally learned to use a level. I never cared much about credit. I cared about outcomes. I'd drive to the vending machine route after dinner, sleeves rolled, counting quarters in the passenger seat while the Civic's vents coughed warm plastic. I grew the route from 6 machines to 32 in 2 years and sold it to a regional operator for a neat profit. Then I rolled that into a foreclosure on a small strip of storage units off the interstate. 39 doors with dented roll-ups and weeds out front. The first time I stood in the gravel lot at dusk, keys heavy in my pocket, I felt like I'd found a choir no one else could hear. My wife didn't come to see them. She went with her mother to a spa that weekend. "I'll come by when it looks like a business, not a junkyard," she said, waving a lime green nail file. I hired a crew to resurface the asphalt, replaced the locks, upgraded lighting, installed a motion camera, and ran a special for teachers and traveling nurses. Within 3 months, occupancy jumped. Within a year, it was a waiting list. My wife didn't notice, or she pretended not to. She was building a presence online: yoga, skincare, brand collaborations that occasionally sent her free products and a small check if she posted a video within a 24-hour window. She liked lighting, softboxes, matching storage bins. She liked saying "we" when she meant "I" and "I" when she meant "you." I kept wearing my steel-toe boots. I kept the Civic. I kept the habit of picking up loose screws wherever I walked. You learn to collect things that can put holes in you later. Whenever her family gathered for birthdays or random Tuesdays that her mother deemed family nights, the conversation turned to jobs and apartments and travel. "Mason works. What is it again?" her mother would ask, slicing chicken with slow precision. "Facilities," my wife would answer. "Maintenance. But he's thinking of starting something someday." Then they'd pivot to chase his plans, his new sales job that came with an expensive-looking name badge, his vision board, his mentor who used words like conquer and crush. They'd talk about Hawaii or lake houses or a certain brand of countertop like it had a personality. I'd say little, help clear plates, and book a 6 a.m. meeting the next morning with a contractor who liked early starts. If you're wondering why I married someone who talked to me like that, I've asked myself the same question. At first, she was kind. At first, she said she loved that I didn't pretend. She told me I was steady. That word meant something to me, until steady started to sound like stagnant. Until every time I said no to another weekend trip or a new subscription box, she said I was thinking small. The first real crack, one I could feel, was our third anniversary dinner. We went to a trendy place with plants hanging from the ceiling like we were eating in a greenhouse. She ordered something with edible flowers. I told her I was closing on a second storage property, smaller, across town, 23 units and a metal office the size of a closet. It's a good price, I said. Careful, the way you hold a glass partway through a long walk. We'll be tight for a bit, but the numbers work. She looked at me, then at the waiter. He means he wants us to keep eating at home forever, she said, smiling. Do you know he still drives a car from college? The waiter laughed politely. I remember the prickle at the base of my neck, the unsaid thought that rose, and then sat back down. We're supposed to be on the same team. And then came the credit card bill. I found it on the kitchen island under a stack of brand mailers. A card I didn't know about, with my name. Gifts for her mother from both of us, a weekend for girls' wellness, and a glossy white coffee table I had to assemble at midnight while she filmed a video about intentional living. I confronted her, quietly, because loud hadn't worked. She shrugged. You can afford it, she said, almost bored. What's the point of building a life if your life looks like a workshop? I canceled the card. She cried to her mother. Her mother called me a controlling minimalist and said real men buy things that shine. I went to counseling alone. The therapist had kind eyes and a plant he watered between sessions. You speak like a man who's always picking up after other people's messes, he said. Is that something you learned or something you chose? I left with homework. Try asking for appreciation directly. I did. I asked my wife if she could stop making jokes about my work at family dinners. I asked if we could set a budget for her content creation so I wasn't the one smoothing every edge afterward. She looked at me like I'd asked her to move to a cave. You're jealous, she said. Just admit it. You want what I have. I didn't, and that somehow made it worse. The day she filed, she did it with a performance. Papers served at noon when I got home to swap boots for clean sneakers. Her mother waited in the car, engine running like a getaway. You've never provided the lifestyle I deserve, she said gently, as if we were discussing the weather. I married potential. Potential didn't show up. I stared at the ring light still set up in our living room. She had filmed a brand pep talk that morning about gratitude. I hired a lawyer who didn't have a glossy office. He wore scuffed wingtips and kept a candy dish full of peppermints. He listened more than he spoke. When I finished laying it out, storage units, vending machines sold, small contracts with the city for power washing, a recent quiet buy-in to a partner's laundromat, he tapped his pen and asked one question. Has she seen what you file? I told him she hadn't. We filed separately. She didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer. You're going to get painted as a man with means hidden behind a dirty shirt, he said, not unkindly. Your best protection is sunlight. Full disclosure. Every contract, every LLC, every asset, every dollar. Don't posture. Don't be clever. Be exact. He handed me a checklist that looked like a grocery list written by a machine. Bank accounts, K-1s, leases, insurance policies, the works. Also, he added, stop fixing things at her family's house. I brought boxes to his office. Actual boxes. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor at midnight and labeled files with dates. I included the worst details alongside the best. The small emergency loan I took one winter for a roof when a tenant's unit flooded, the ugly tax bill the year I mistimed a sale, the weeks I paid myself less because the asphalt contractor ran over schedule. I added the contracts that represented future profit, not just present cash. A 5-year renewal with the city for grounds cleaning. A signed letter of intent from a developer who wanted part of my interstate lot for a billboard. Documentation for the partnership that owned our small laundromat. Old machines, reliable coins, steady earnings that smoothed stormy months. It wasn't flashy. It was a map of boredom built into something sturdy. The temporary hearing arrived. She came in a silk blouse with a sharp collar and a lipstick color that looked like confidence. Her mother sat behind her, spine straight, a small smile sitting on her face like a brooch. Chase came too, wearing a suit he borrowed from a friend, hovering in the doorway trying to look like an ally and a witness at once. My side of the room held my lawyer and the box I had carried in myself because I don't like trusting handles on old cardboard. Her attorney was bright and polished, the kind who says your first name like he's known you since childhood. He told the judge that my wife had supported me through years of experimentation and deserved compensatory lifestyle support and immediate temporary alimony. He called my businesses hustles. He gestured at my shoes when he said the word. Appearance is not a crime, my lawyer said dryly when it was his turn. Books are. The judge, a woman with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her eyes, asked for disclosures. We'll review in chambers, she said. But I'll glance at the highlights now to set temporary orders. My wife's attorney slid forward a neat binder. My lawyer stacked our files and a thumb drive on the table like a man setting down lumber, then slid over a summary sheet that began with a number my wife had never seen. I caught her glance at it. A small, involuntary tick at the corner of her mouth. Then she smirked again, dismissive, as if the columns were just words on paper. Her mother leaned forward like a hawk sighting something in a field. Chase shifted, whispering, "That's not real. He can't have that." The judge read silently. She flipped a page. She looked up at me, then at my wife. Then she reached for my wife's binder and set it next to our stack. "Mrs. Hart," she said calmly, "your counsel asserts a certain picture of your husband's finances. The disclosures in front of me paint a different one, not only in present income, but in assets and premarital holdings." My wife's attorney interrupted, lightly, saying something about lifestyle and expectations and future earning potential on her side, and lack of transparency on mine. My lawyer lifted a finger. "Respectfully, Your Honor, we filed sworn statements for every entity and provided tax returns for 5 years, including K-1s and schedules. There is also a trust established before the marriage, funded by proceeds from assets sold prior to the union, with a clear paper trail." He said it with no flourish. He sounded like someone reading a weather report. My wife shot me a look then, sharp, puzzled, a ripple under smooth water. It was the first time she looked at me instead of through me. I remembered all the nights I drove the empty streets, counting the hours by the glow of convenience store signs. I remembered how many times I had wanted to say, "I am building something for us, and I know it's not pretty, but it is real." Instead, I had said things like, "Trust me." And when that didn't work, I stopped saying anything. The judge tapped the stack with the back of her pen. "For temporary orders," she said, "we need clarity, not conjecture. We will establish support based on actual need and on evidence, not on aspiration." She looked at me again. It wasn't a soft look, but it wasn't unkind. "Mr. Hart, your disclosures indicate multiple revenue streams, some pass-through, some fixed, some with significant depreciation affecting taxable income." She turned another page. "And your personal monthly spending is frugal." She said the last word carefully, as if it were uncommon in the room. My wife's mother whispered, "Impossible," to no one in particular. My wife folded her arms, face rigid, eyes locked on the judge like force alone could change numbers. The judge closed the folder halfway and leaned back. "Before I said anything," she said, "I want one question answered plainly." She looked at my wife. "You have stated that your husband has failed to provide you a reasonable lifestyle and that you supported him while he pursued inconsistent ventures. Is that your position?" My wife lifted her chin. "Yes," she said, voice steady. "He never aimed higher. He never gave me the life we planned." "And Mr. Hart," the judge said, turning to me, "is it your testimony that you have contributed steadily to the household and that your financial growth has been consistent, documented, and largely separate from speculative risk?" My throat felt suddenly dry. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I have records of everything." That was true. The neat kind of true that either saves you or exposes you completely. The judge nodded once, as if that answer synced with something she'd already concluded. She lifted the summary sheet again and tapped the first line with her pen. "Then I am going to read one number into the record," she said, "so we can have an honest starting point." She paused. The courtroom hummed faintly. Air vents, shoes shifting, pins being held a little tighter. My wife's attorney leaned forward, ready. My wife's mother tilted her head, a smile tightening. Sure the number would be small enough to scoff at. The judge cleared her throat. Her eyes scanned the page. I felt the floor widen and then narrow under my boots, a balance beam laid over old years. In the corner of my eye, I saw my wife look quickly at me again, just once, like a reflex she couldn't control. The judge lifted the first page to make sure the figures aligned with the attachments, and then looked up, voice level, but carrying to the back row. "This," she said, "is Mr. Hart's disclosed net worth." Then she said the number. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough that even the bailiff's eyebrows lifted a millimeter. I felt something strange as she spoke. No surge of triumph, no flare of vindication, just the odd, weightless feeling you get when the elevator stops and your body keeps moving a fraction of a second longer. My wife's face didn't move at first. It was almost impressive how still she kept it. Then the smirk dissolved, not dramatically, not like in the movies. It dissolved the way frost does when the sun finally finds it, from the edges inward, reluctant, and then gone. Her attorney blinked 3 times in quick succession. Her mother's hand, resting on her handbag, tightened until the leather creaked. Chase made a small sound, a half laugh that got lost somewhere between his throat and his teeth. I didn't look at any of them for more than a second. I kept my eyes on the judge because I knew from 100 little moments in my life that looking around while a room recalibrates is how you get dizzy. The judge, for her part, didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked like she'd expected the number and wanted to see what the people attached to it would do. "We will proceed on the basis of the evidence before us," she said evenly, sliding the summary sheet back on top of the stack. "For temporary orders, I am setting an interim arrangement that reflects documented income and reasonable expenses. Neither party is permitted to dissipate marital assets. No large purchases. No transfers over $5,000 without mutual consent or court permission. Discovery will continue." She said it like a list she'd said 1,000 times, and maybe she had. But every item hit like a small gavel. No dissipating assets. My wife swallowed, eyes down. Her attorney recovered the fastest. "Your Honor," he said, smooth again, "we appreciate the court's thoroughness. We would like to enter, for the record, the lifestyle to which Mrs. Hart became accustomed during the marriage and the sacrifices she made to support Mr. Hart's career aspirations." My lawyer stood without haste. "We also appreciate the court's thoroughness," he said, "and we will be submitting evidence that the lifestyle in question was largely aspirational, curated for social media, and financed, in significant part, by undisclosed revolving credit opened in Mr. Hart's name without his knowledge." He paused a heartbeat. "We have the statements." I hadn't asked him to say that out loud. We had agreed to keep that piece as leverage in discovery, not theater. But as soon as the words left his mouth, I saw why he did it. My wife's head lifted fast. Her mother froze. Chase looked at the floor. The judge didn't change expression, but she wrote something on her notepad with a neat, short motion. The hearing moved on. Dates, deadlines, next steps. The judge set a schedule for depositions and a deadline for financial affidavits. She reminded both sides that sworn statements are not suggestions. She made a point of saying that any party found to have misrepresented material facts would be sanctioned. It was clinical, procedural, and yet every sentence felt personal because all of it lived inside the walls I used to call home. When she adjourned, the sound of chairs scraping the floor was louder than the gavel. We filed out in a slow knot. In the corridor, the courthouse air felt cooler, less staged. My lawyer touched my elbow lightly. "Good day," he said under his breath, the way a coach might tell a runner that their time was solid, not world-class. "Don't gloat. Don't speak to them." He meant my wife's family. I nodded. They spoke to me anyway. Her mother stepped into my path with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You hid," she said softly. "You hid everything. That's not what family does." She said family like an ornament. I let the words pass by me. My wife stood a step behind her, arms crossed, face controlled. "You could have told me," she said. That landed. Not because it was fair, but because it was a truth pointed in the wrong direction. I could have told her, and she could have listened, and both of us chose predictable roles instead. "I filed taxes," I said finally, keeping my voice low. "I left my paperwork in plain sight. I asked you to look at contracts and you laughed. I tried. The last two words came out more tired than I meant. I expected a comeback, a deflection, a line about my boots or my car. What I didn't expect was the flicker in her eyes, the quick flash of something that might have been regret or might have been calculation. Chase saved her from answering. "So you're rich now," he blurted, not caring that we were in a hallway with strangers walking around us. "And you still dress like a janitor." He grinned at his own bravery. "Must be nice, conning the system." My lawyer stepped between us without touching anyone. "We're done for today," he said, calm as a metronome, and steered me toward the elevators. Back in his office, we sat with the door closed while the city noise rubbed against the windows. He took off his glasses and set them on a legal pad. "She's going to pivot," he said. "The temporary shock will wear off. Expect a narrative about hidden wealth and emotional neglect. Expect friends and family testimonials about how she held the household together while you were allegedly off chasing coins. Expect discovery requests for everything, including your middle school report cards." "I kept everything," I said. "You saw the boxes." "I did," he said. "And I saw the one thing missing, acknowledgement." He held up a hand before I could ask what he meant. "Not from her. From you. You did the work in the dark for years. You were okay with that. But a part of you also wanted her to see you. That part is loud today. If you let it drive, you'll make mistakes. You'll over-explain. You'll send a text you regret. Don't. Stay boring. Boring wins cases like this." I took a peppermint from the dish and turned it in my fingers until the wrapper squeaked. "What about the credit cards?" "We will handle it," he said. "Carefully. If we push too hard too fast, her attorney will move to paint it as financial control or paranoia. We'll subpoena the statements we don't have, call the bank's fraud team, and keep our powder dry. Also, I need you to tell me something you haven't yet." I looked up. He waited. "The trust," he said. "You mentioned it was funded with proceeds from assets before the marriage. You also said your grandfather left you a small piece of land out by the river, floodplain, worth more on paper than in practice. We listed it. Fine. What you didn't say is why the trust instruments are written with survivorship conditions that trigger on events other than death." I read every line. "Someone older taught you how to build fire breaks." I thought of my grandfather's handwriting, block letters on yellow paper. He was a carpenter who spoke 5 different ways of saying measure twice. When I was 15, he told me a story about a friend whose family came apart in court. "People don't change when they're hungry," he'd said. "They change when there's pie on the table." He showed me how to put gates in fences no one notices until they need to move cattle. "My grandfather didn't leave much," I said. "But he left tools." The lawyer nodded like I'd answered a different question. "Well," he said, "the tools are working." The first week after the hearing was quiet in an unsettling way, like the space after a thunderclap when your ears are still ringing. I went to the properties early and stayed late. I replaced a dented roll-up door myself because I needed to feel a steel panel give under a mallet. I made deposits and logged receipts and changed the bulbs in the motion lights because the flicker made me itch. I ate at the diner where the waitress calls everyone Han and never asks what you're working on because she's got her own overtime to think about. I slept some. Then the request started. Her attorney sent interrogatories with questions that felt less like inquiries and more like accusations written in polite grammar. Provide every password you have used in the last 5 years. Provide a list of every person to whom you have spoken about your business. Provide documentation of all gifts given to any person in the last 7 years. Provide your journals. Provide your notebooks. Provide your budget for clothing. The last one would have been funny if it didn't come attached to a subpoena. My lawyer returned their volley with our own. Provide all social media income statements. Provide tax returns for the last 5 years. Provide bank statements for all accounts under your name or for your benefit. Provide any and all credit applications made in the last 5 years, including for lines of credit and retail cards. Provide documentation of all expenditures over $1,000 made without Mr. Hart's knowledge. The house felt like a set after a play closed. You can still see where the furniture was, even if it's gone. I took photos of everything, room by room, not because I had to. Our county didn't require a property inventory for temporary orders, but because I needed proof of something that looked like a past. The ring light still stood in the living room, tall and ridiculous. She had taken her camera, her plants, her collection of neutrally colored blankets that all felt the same. I opened a cupboard and found 6 kinds of tea she bought for aesthetic videos and never drank. I closed it and leaned my forehead against the door until the cool, cheap wood steadied me. The first deposition was set for a Tuesday. We sat around a table with a court reporter whose fingers moved like a piano player's. My wife's attorney asked the questions. Mine objected when he needed to. It was tedious and surgical. Describe your income sources. I did. Describe your bookkeeping practices. I did. Why did you keep financial details in separate folders rather than on the kitchen counter? Because grease splatters. Did you ever say to your wife the exact words, "Trust me"? Yes. How many times? Too many. Then it was her turn 2 days later, and I sat behind my lawyer with a legal pad and a pen I never uncapped. Her attorney had coached her well. She answered slowly, carefully, with the kind of softness that makes a microphone lean closer. I supported his dreams, she said. I created a home. I built community online that he benefited from. My lawyer kept his face neutral and his voice even. Do you recall opening any lines of credit in your husband's name? She looked surprised. No. Do you recall authorizing any charges above $500 on any account that you did not disclose to your husband? Not that I remember. He slid a packet across the table. Exhibit 12, he said. The bank statements we had pulled with my authorization, the ones that showed a card issued on my account, mailed to our address, activated via our shared landline. She glanced down once, then looked up as if the papers hurt her eyes. He knew, she said. We discussed it. My chest went cold. We had not. Her attorney objected to the characterization. The court reporter kept typing, unmoved. My lawyer didn't push. He let the denial sit, just long enough for it to cool. Then he moved on to the brand money, the affiliate links, the sponsored posts written as two-person narratives that featured me as the tidy handyman in the background. Did the companies pay you directly? He asked. Sometimes, she said. Sometimes they sent product. Do you have records of the products received as compensation? No, she said softly. I didn't know I needed to keep receipts for face cream. Afterward, alone in the elevator, my lawyer blew out a slow breath. She'll hold the line, he said. She'll say you consented. We will need something that doesn't rely on your word against hers. He looked at me. Where did she activate that card? I pictured our kitchen, the landline, the way she once joked about old people phones while using it to call her mother because the cell reception was bad in that corner. Then I pictured the storage office and the small desk phone I'd kept for emergencies. No, the activation record showed our home number. I had asked the bank. That evening, while sorting receipts, I found something I didn't know I had. A small, crumpled square of paper wedged into the seam of a folder. It was a delivery receipt from 2 years ago, a package signed for by my wife, while I was out replacing a busted lock at the East property. The package came from a high-end electronics store. The signer's note said, "Camera lens, gift from brand. Do not bend." The courier had scanned the ID for verification. On the line where billing reference sat, a number I recognized. The last 4 digits matched the card she'd denied existed. There's a moment, when a puzzle clicks, that you feel both relief and dread. Relief because the picture is finally whole. Dread because you can't pretend not to see it anymore. I took a photo of the receipt with the date and the package number and sent it to my lawyer with no commentary, just the image. He replied with a single word. Good. Days turned into a rhythm. Work, paperwork, small meals, sleep. I avoided the places where I might see her by accident. The health food store where they know your name. The coffee shop where we used to sit with laptops and say we were planning. Her mother started posting quotes online about narcissists and financial abuse, and friends we hadn't seen in years commented hearts and stay strong. A cousin sent me a text with no words, just a screenshot of one of those posts and the message bubble left open, as if he wanted me to fill it with something indicting and instead thought better of it. 2 weeks before the next hearing, I got a call from the bank's fraud department. We had opened a case for the unauthorized card as a matter of process, not because I expected a miracle. The woman on the phone spoke in measured tones that suggested she's heard every version of my story 10 times a day. We have reviewed the voice authorization for the card activation, she said. As you know, activation was completed via your home phone. Our system records a brief voice print to match future calls. Would you like a copy of the call under subpoena, or shall we hold pending court order? I sat up straighter at my desk. Is the voice mine? I asked. There was a small pause, the kind a professional leaves so that your heartbeat can catch up. No, she said. It matches a female speaker who later called regarding a shipping issue. We have those calls, too. I emailed my lawyer and went for a walk around the back of the property where the gravel gives way to scrub grass and the highway noise fades into a steady hiss. Wind slipped between the units and made the roll-up doors sing a little. I thought about the first time I held one of those dented keys, how heavy it felt for such a small thing. I thought about the way my wife had looked at me in the hallway after the hearing. Anger, yes, and something else. I thought about the apology we would never give each other. Hers for the way she turned me into a joke to survive rooms where people measured worth by shine. Mine for the way I built a life like a fortress and then expected her to read it as an invitation. The morning of the hearing, my lawyer met me on the courthouse steps with a folder under his arm. "We got the call records," he said. "We also got something better." He didn't say what. He likes to reveal things in rooms where they count, not in the wind where they blow away. In the courtroom, the same judge took the same bench. The same bailiff said the same words. My wife sat a few chairs down from me in a suit the color of cloud cover. Her mother wasn't there. Chase wasn't either. For the first time since this began, she looked at me for more than a heartbeat. Her face was calm. Her hands twisted a ring she hadn't worn in years, not the wedding band, but something old from college, a thin band with a tiny stone. The judge called our case and asked for updates. My wife's attorney went first, presenting a request for considerable temporary support based on maintaining stability and ensuring Mrs. Hart is not upended during this process. He used phrases like equitable distribution and standard of living. My lawyer waited, then stood and handed the clerk a thin packet. "We move to supplement the record with new information relevant to the court's consideration of credibility and financial conduct," he said. He spoke about voice prints and activation calls, about shipping signatures and the neat alignment of dates. Then he paused, tapped the next page, and looked up. "And, Your Honor," he said, "we have also received a report from Mr. Hart's accountant concerning a discrepancy in the financial affidavit filed by Mrs. Hart last week." He slid a document only the judge could see. The judge took it without comment and read. I watched the lines in her forehead change shape. My wife's attorney shifted, performing calm. My wife's fingers went still on the little ring. My heart did that elevator thing again, up a fraction, down a fraction, and then holding, waiting for the floor to move. The judge set the paper down with care, almost gently, as if it were a fragile piece of something that could be important later. She looked at my wife, then at her attorney, and when she spoke her voice was just a shade firmer than before. "Mrs. Hart, I have a question for you about your affidavit and the source of certain deposits in the 6 months preceding the filing." The room got quiet in a new way, not the procedural quiet of legal process, but the human quiet of an answer being built in real time. Specifically, the judge continued, "Funds that appear to originate from an account not disclosed on your initial statement. Please explain." My wife swallowed. She glanced at her attorney. He leaned in, whispered, and she nodded once. Her eyelids fluttered and then steadied. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough that the court reporter leaned forward a hair to catch it. "Those deposits," she said, "were reimbursements from brand collaborations. I must have forgotten to list that account because it was used for business only." She kept her face smooth. The judge watched her like a carpenter watching a beam settle. "I see," the judge said. "And the brand reimbursements would correspond to invoices, yes?" My wife nodded. "Then you will have invoices." Another nod. "Good," the judge said. "Please provide them." My lawyer didn't look at me, but I felt the change in his breathing. He flipped the next page in his folder. "Your Honor," he said, "we anticipated that explanation and have already subpoenaed the platform used for those brand payments. Their response indicates no reimbursements in the amounts and on the dates listed. What they did provide, however, is an internal note referencing a bank account ending in 1743 as the destination for affiliate payouts. That account is in the name of Mrs. Hart's mother." He let the words stand. No flourish. The judge didn't blink. My wife did. Behind us, a chair creaked. The court reporter's keys clicked faster, then steadied. The judge folded her hands. "Counsel," she said to my wife's attorney. He cleared his throat, the first crack in his polish. "We have not yet had the opportunity to review those materials," he said. "We would request time to confer with our client and, if necessary, amend the affidavit." The judge nodded once. "You will do so by Friday." She looked at my wife, not unkindly, but with a kind of tired gravity. Mrs. Hart, the court takes the accuracy of affidavits seriously. Misstatements, even accidental, have consequences. I expect your full cooperation. The judge moved on to the rest of the docket with the efficiency of someone folding laundry. Temporary orders would hold. Discovery would deepen. There would be another hearing and another after that, if needed. The system churned, and we were inside it, small figures turning with it whether we liked the motion or not. We stepped back into the corridor. My lawyer touched the folder under his arm like it was a holster. "We're not done," he said. "But the pattern is revealing itself." He studied my face. "You're not celebrating." I shook my head. "It doesn't feel like winning," I said. "It feels like watching a house I built catch a leak and trying to save the beams." He nodded. "That's because you're not a destroyer by nature. Keep that. Let the process do the breaking." Down the hall, my wife stood by the window with her phone in her hand, staring at nothing. A ray of sun cut across the floor and landed on her shoe. She looked, not small, exactly, but thinner than the version of herself that laughed on porches. She turned, noticed me, and for a second something like the first year of our marriage flickered between us. The dinners with too much garlic, the way she used to sit on the counter and dangle her feet while I told stories about rusty gate motors, and she told me about lighting angles. She walked toward me, stopping at a polite distance. "I didn't know the number," she said quietly. There was no sarcasm, no edge, just a sentence. "I know," I said. "I don't know if it would have changed anything." She looked down at her hands. "Me neither." Then, after a beat, "Did you ever think about telling me anyway?" I laughed once, not unkindly. "Every day," I said. And every day I thought, tomorrow, when we're less tired, when the sink isn't full, when the shelf isn't falling, when the jokes aren't happening. And then the days passed, and I started believing it was better to be invisible than to be mocked. She bit her lip. "I didn't know it felt that way." "That's the problem," I said. "We didn't know a lot of things." She nodded and turned as if to go, then stopped. "If my mother," she began, then stopped again, choosing a different route. "The account, it's not what it looks like." She stared at me, waiting to see what I'd do with that. I didn't give her the relief of an easy out or the cruelty of a hard accusation. I waited. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then her attorney called her name. She went. Back at the office, my lawyer finally told me what he'd held back on the steps. He set a thin stack of printouts on the desk. "We pulled the metadata on her affidavit," he said. "It was edited 3 times from an IP address registered to her mother's home. We have the timestamps." He looked at me. "There's a universe where your wife is being steered." He didn't say used. He didn't have to. "If that's the case," he continued, "pushing harder than needed may backfire. Judges notice when a party looks more like a pawn than a queen." I sat with that. I thought about boxes inside boxes, about old lessons from my grandfather about gates and fences. I thought about the difference between winning and burning. I thought about the way my wife's voice sounded when she asked if I ever considered telling her anyway. I thought about my own answer and the truth inside it that made my chest ache in a quiet, steady way. We planned next steps. Subpoenas. A motion to compel production of devices for a limited forensic review. A notice to depose her mother. I drove to the east property at dusk and walked the rows as the lights clicked on one by one, neat halos in the growing dark. Somewhere, a train's horn blew, long and lonesome, the way they do when they cross open roads. I stood there until the horn faded, and the only sound left was the highway hiss. The next morning, an email hit my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was nothing, just a blank line. The body contained a single sentence and an attachment. The sentence said, "You should see this before Friday." The attachment was a photo, grainy, angled, clearly taken with a phone in a hurry, like someone didn't want to be seen. It showed a laptop screen with a draft email open. The sender field was my wife's mother's email. The draft was addressed to my wife's attorney. The first line read, "We need to make sure he never discloses the Henderson option," and then the image cut off mid-sentence as if the photographer had lowered their hand too quickly. I stared at the photo until the edges got sharp again. Henderson. The word meant nothing and everything. I typed the letters into my memory and came up with 2 hits. Henderson Scrap and Salvage, where I'd once bought a row of lockers for the West property, and Henderson Parkway, an old exit off the interstate where a developer had been sniffing around for billboard rights and where, once, over coffee. The manager of a nearby warehouse had told me that a land swap was in the air. I had never used the word option in any paperwork with Henderson anything. That didn't mean someone else hadn't. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a note. Unknown source. Could be a trap. But if not, Friday might be loud. Then I sat back, peppermint unwrapped and forgotten on the desk, and listened to the office clock tick like a rail crossing far off in the night, counting out the seconds between where I stood and the next sound I couldn't yet hear. The morning of the final hearing felt like a storm that had been building for years. I sat outside the courthouse with my lawyer, folder in his lap, and thought about all the roads that led here. The vending machines, the late-night repairs, the jokes at dinner tables, the silences I let grow like ivy on the walls of my marriage. My wife arrived 10 minutes late, her mother at her side like a shadow. They walked in together, heads high, but I noticed the hesitation in her step. She wasn't the same person who once told me I was small-minded while posting another photo about abundance. She looked brittle, like someone who had built her identity on glass shelves that were now trembling under weight. The judge called our case. Both attorneys stood, both spoke in careful tones. The court had already seen the financials, already seen the voice records of the credit card activation, already seen the discrepancies in her affidavit. What remained was the question of intent and division. My lawyer stood first. Your Honor, we are asking the court to recognize the documented pattern, undisclosed accounts, misrepresentation of income, and diversion of funds to a relative's account. My client has been consistent, transparent, and cooperative. He seeks only equitable division under the law and protection of his premarital trust. Then he sat, folding his hands. Her attorney tried to counter with lifestyle, with sacrifice, with emotional support. He spoke about the unseen labor of a spouse, about maintaining a home, about building a presence. But each time he gestured toward her affidavit, the judge's expression grew tighter. When he finished, the silence was louder than his words. Then the judge spoke. The court has considered testimony, evidence, and the credibility of disclosures. She looked directly at my wife. Mrs. Hart, the discrepancies in your filings are serious. While the court recognizes the contributions of non-financial labor in a marriage, it does not excuse dishonesty. You were asked for full disclosure. You did not provide it. Furthermore, evidence indicates deliberate concealment of funds through an account in your mother's name. That undermines your credibility before this court. Her mother shifted uncomfortably, but the judge wasn't done. The law requires fairness. Mr. Hart has demonstrated consistent, documented financial growth and has protected premarital assets appropriately. Those assets will remain his. Marital property will be divided equitably, not equally, given the circumstances. She turned another page. The request for spousal support is denied. Temporary orders will be lifted. The court finds no basis to order alimony when misrepresentation has occurred. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. My wife's face drained of color. Her attorney tried to interject, citing precedent, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. This matter is concluded. Mrs. Hart, you will produce the invoices you claimed within 10 days or face sanction. Mr. Hart, your disclosures are accepted. The marital residence, being primarily funded from your separate accounts, remains yours. Court is adjourned. She struck the gavel. The room erupted into murmurs. My wife stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight. Her mother leaned in to whisper, but my wife didn't move. For the first time in years, she looked small, not because of me, but because the mask she wore had cracked under its own weight. Outside, the sun was sharp, almost mocking after so many gray days. My lawyer clapped my shoulder. You played it the right way, he said. You let the evidence speak. That's why you won. I nodded, though it didn't feel like winning. It felt like survival. It felt like walking out of a burning building with soot on your hands and lungs full of smoke, grateful for the air, but aware of the wreckage behind you. She caught up to me at the bottom of the courthouse steps. No mother, no attorney, just her. You could have destroyed me, she said quietly. You didn't. Her voice trembled on the edge of accusation and relief. I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't have to, I said. You did that yourself. She flinched, then looked down at her shoes. Was it ever enough? She asked. The question was raw, stripped of pride. I thought of the dinners, the garlic, the counters, the late nights, the quiet mornings before the world woke. It could have been, I said softly. But we didn't let it be. She turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, as her mother called her from the car. I stood there until they were gone, then breathed deep. For the first time in months, the air didn't taste like iron. In the weeks that followed, life became simple again. I went back to the properties, fixed a leaking gutter, replaced a broken keypad. Tenants waved, kids rode bikes past the units, and the world kept turning. I sold one of the smaller lots at a profit and reinvested in a laundromat across town. My lawyer filed the last of the paperwork, and the decree came in the mail. Formal words sealing the end of something that had already ended long before. One night, I sat on the gravel at the edge of the east property and watched the sunset stain the sky orange and purple. The lights on the units clicked on one by one, steady and unremarkable. I thought about everything I'd lost, everything I'd kept, and everything I'd built with my own hands. My wife had called me a failure. Maybe, to her, I always would be. But the steady hum of the lights, the weight of the keys in my pocket, the quiet knowledge that I had endured without crumbling, those were the measures that mattered. When I stood up, brushed the dust from my jeans, and locked the gate behind me, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like a man who had walked through fire, not with a smirk or a performance, but with quiet steps that led him out the other side. And for me, that was more than enough.